introduce him. He's a research scientist at College of Computing and Data Science at NTU University, Singapore. He's specializing in post-quantum cryptography. His research focus is mainly on the PQC implementation across all computing platforms, specifically on embedded devices. So he has done his BTech from Tiruchi, NIT Tiruchi in ECE, and he has done a PhD from NTU University. And he has published papers in IEEE Chess, IEEE TIFS, DATE, ACS, CSS, ACM computing surveys. And he has recently co-founded a PQ Station, a company providing technology and tools for migrating to post-quantum cryptography. Welcome, Dr. Prasanna. Stage is yours.
I would like to first thank CDAC for giving me this opportunity to present at ICSS at a special workshop on post-quantum cryptography. Yes, I'm Prasanna Ravi. I'm from NTU Singapore. As Raghavendra sir has mentioned, I completed my PhD on post-quantum cryptography just last year, mainly focusing on physical attacks on post-quantum crypto. So, how many of you here are familiar or have heard about physical attacks on cryptographic algorithms like side channel attacks and fault attacks? Okay. So, so the idea of physical attacks is that even though your cryptographic algorithms might be theoretically secure, where ultimately you're going to implement these crypto algorithms on our practical devices, like your Intel processors, your ARM processors, your FPGAs, ASICs. And turns out that these physical devices leave out physical signatures, and this gives extra information for an attacker to potentially break the crypto algorithm. So essentially devices emit information through side channels, and an attacker can leverage this additional side channel information in order to perform practical attacks on crypto algorithms. So that's essentially the concept of physical attacks, but I'll get into details. And in this particular talk, we're going to be talking about physical attacks on post-quantum crypto algorithms. Physical attacks are well known on classical algorithms like RSA, ECC, AES, or any other crypto algorithm. In this talk, I'll be focusing on physical attacks on PQC algorithms. And during my PhD, not just my works, but works from other researchers in the crypto community identified new types of side channel attacks that can be carried out on post-quantum crypto implementations. So it turns out that PQC algorithms can resist quantum attacks, but then when you implement them on our practical platforms, you can actually do different types of side channel attacks and in an easier manner compared to traditional schemes. So that's what I'm going to basically focus on. So the outline of the talk is going to be as follows. So I will briefly touch upon, lay some context on PQC as well as PQC migration as to what's actually happening around the world when it comes to PQC migration, standards, guidelines, timelines. I'll just touch upon a bit. because very important people are here, decision makers when it comes to PQC policy or quantum migration policy. So I think it's a good avenue to talk about that. Then I will directly move on to side channel attacks and fault attacks on Kyber, which is the NIST PQC standard for chems, followed by conclusion. So I like this picture very much because the paper that came out in 1994 is like a Godzilla. So this one really shook the cryptography community because it breaks discrete logarithm and factoring in one shot. It's not like one paper broke factoring, one paper discrete logarithm, both in one shot. So this is the famous paper that from Peter Shor, which published the Shor's algorithm. How are the numbers looking like? So this is actually a table taken from the consensus study report from the National Academic Press in 2019. So as you can see, for RSA, you need a few million qubits to break it in a few hours. And for ECC, to break the discrete logarithm problem, you need, I would say, slightly lesser, slightly higher time period, but the number of qubits is still in the few millions. So as you can see, there is a distinction between logical qubits and physical qubits, because in order to realize these many logical qubits based on whatever error correction mechanism we have, right, we need these many physical qubits. So essentially what we need is a few thousand logical qubits, clean qubits, but in order to realize these few thousand clean qubits, you need a few million physical qubits. So these are just some numbers, and I think this was published in 2019, but even today I think these numbers still stand. Maybe there's a little bit improvement, but there's not been a significant breakthrough as such. So, and I think this is a very nice picture from IBM, quantum status and roadmap. As you can see, they are actually keeping up with the trajectory, meaning it is like Moore's law, but for quantum computers, and they're actually keeping up with their promise until now. So it's actually quite scary, because in 2029, 2030, they're already promising 10 power 5 qubits, which is quite a lot. And there is actually also this website which is from the Cloud Security Alliance, which is actually having a countdown to Y2Q moment. Y2Q is basically years to quantum, which defines the exact moment when quantum computers can break RSA 2048 in a day. So that's like defined as one concrete, I would say, landmark moment. And if we are able to achieve this, then it's doomsday for cryptography. So I think we need to act quite fast. I think this number is still a bit optimistic, but we are roughly looking at a 2030, 2035 range when this can potentially happen. And I think the recent news from Google Willow is also not very pleasant for the cryptography community. But obviously, I think if you look at it, if you look at the results very carefully, it's still not, it doesn't really ring any alarm bells as such, but rapid progress is being made and we need to monitor it very closely. So, so when it comes to PQC, I think this is the timeline or the history of post-quantum cryptography. 2016 was an important year because NIST initiated the calls for standardizing PQC, because whatever crypto that we are currently using are actually standards from NIST 20 years before. So for example, AES was standardized in 1997, ECC probably in mid-2000s. So NIST in 2016 called out proposals for PQC standardization, and over a period of 5 years, I would say 2017 to 2022, from 69 algorithms, they were trimmed down all the way to, I would say, 4 algorithms that were ultimately standardized. And we are now at 2024 where we have the first standards for PQC. We have 4 algorithms. I will talk about that in a moment. And also one more important thing is there is also an additional rounds for more PQC based chems and signature schemes. So then we already have 4 standards, but apart from that they also want to standardize more and more, because these algorithms are relatively new and cryptography community wants to build confidence, and you can only build confidence over time. So if your algorithm has not been broken for 10 years, then you know if the algorithm is good. Because these algorithms are quite new, they want to standardize more and more algorithms, so even if one breaks, they always have a fallback option. And that also is about crypto agility, that you have multiple algorithms to actually fall back on. You're not necessarily placing all your bets on one single algorithm. It's like investing, right? You don't want to invest all your money in one stock. You want to spread your risk, so invest in multiple stocks. Similarly, NIST also wants to standardize probably 5, 6, 7 different algorithms, so that even if one breaks, they always have something else to fall back on. And this is very important because Psych was a very important scheme, was almost going to become a standard, and 2 weeks before the results were announced, it was broken. And similarly, there's another scheme called Rainbow, which is based on multivariate quadratic cryptography. And this was also broken like a few weeks before the actual results of the NIST PQC standards was going to be announced. So yeah, so it's good to actually have multiple options, and that also makes it very challenging because you need to also be an expert in all these algorithms, implement all these algorithms securely. So it's going to be a big challenge. And I hope that by the year 2038, which is when roughly a large a majority of the quantum community is expecting that they'll be able to break RSA. So I think we are looking at a 13-year time period. And I think we've already started. There's really good progress because your Google Chrome browser already supports MLChem. Apple's iMessage supports MLChem. Zoom end-to-end encryption meetings support MLChem. A lot of Cloudflare web servers already support MLChem. So at least on the key exchange side, there's been really good progress. Authentication still is a bit slow because authentication means the certificate authorities have to migrate, the intermediate certificate authorities. So, and also there is not so much urgency in migrating the signatures part, because only when a quantum computer is actually available, you can actually break authentication. Authentication is done during runtime. If you want to compromise authentication, you have to compromise at that moment. So still quantum computers are a few years away. So right now the urgency is to actually transition the chems, the key exchange schemes, because I think you would have heard about the harvest now, decrypt later threat. So attackers can harvest the encrypted data now and decrypt it later once a quantum computer is available. So that's the reason why confidentiality is actually under more threat than authentication. And that's the reason why a lot of these companies or a lot of these products have adopted PQC-based chems first. For authentication, I think there is not so much urgency, but it will ultimately be done. Ultimately be done probably in a couple of years. So there's been really good progress, and that's good. And yeah. And I think, yeah, so this is an important table because this is basically the security strength mapping of a PQC algorithm against a symmetric key cryptographic algorithm. So any PQC algorithm you categorize in 5 levels, NIST security category 1 to 5, which is mapping to an equivalent symmetric key algorithm. So for example, security category 3 is equivalent to the security strength of AES-192. Security category 5 is equivalent to breaking AES-256. So this is how NIST assesses the security strength of a PQC algorithm. And these are basically the standardized chems, signatures, and block ciphers. I know block ciphers are already secure against quantum attacks, but as you can see, you have MLChem, which is the only standardized chem from NIST. And for signatures, you actually have 3. You have MLDSA and SLHDSA. This is Sphinx plus this is dilithium. And you have 3 security levels for dilithium, 3 security levels for Sphinx. And you also have hash-based signature schemes. This did not participate in the NIST PQC standardization process, but hash-based signature schemes are considered to be quantum secure. And NIST had already standardized these schemes before the NIST PQC process. But these hash-based schemes are only used for limited use cases like code signing, whenever you're doing any software update. So for those scenarios, basically you can use hash-based signature schemes. Apart from NIST, while NIST standardized these algorithms, Kyber, Dilithium, Falcon, and Sphinx Plus, BSI is actually recommending more conservative schemes. So Frodochem and Classic Macaulay's, their performance is roughly about 10 times, if not more, slower than Kyber. But still they want to go for Frodo and Classic Macaulay's because their security proofs are much more stronger and it's much more convincing. So I would say Europe is actually adopting a more conservative approach when it comes to standardization. They will ultimately standardize Kyber as well, because a lot of commercial products will actually use Kyber, but they also want to actually, they are heavily recommending Frodo and Classic Megalis because their security guarantees are much stronger. Kyber, they still want to actually take some more time to assess. And similarly for digital signatures, they want to look at XMSS and LMS because they are also hash-based signature schemes. Hash-based signature schemes are as strong as hash functions. So as long as your hash algorithm is secure, your hash-based signature scheme is secure. So essentially, I think the takeaway is that EU is adopting a more conservative approach, while NIST is much more, they want to push the more efficient PQC algorithms, right? And yeah, there's also an ongoing fourth round for non-lattice based scams. There's an ongoing additional round for non-lattice based signatures as well. Because as you can see, a lot of these algorithms are green, which means they are lattice based algorithms. They also want to standardize schemes from other types of cryptography. And I think Dr. Kabalishwaran and a few of the previous talks did mention about different types of signature schemes from different types of cryptography. So that's something ongoing, and I think it will take probably 2 to 3 more years probably to have more PQC algorithms. So essentially it's like placing your eggs in multiple baskets. Don't place all your eggs in the same basket, because if the basket falls, then everything is gone. So yeah, I think now I'd like to touch upon mandates and regulations for quantum safe migration in terms of what's actually happening around the world. So in the US, this is actually a memorandum from the White House in 2022. And right now it's actually an act. I think it's a Cybersecurity Preparedness Act in the US. It's a national law wherein they have to actually migrate all the government agency systems to quantum safe cryptography, and they have very clear timelines. I'll talk about that in a bit. White House also released a report on post-quantum crypto migration in July 2024. They said that they're probably estimating around $7 billion for PQC migration just for federal systems, just for the government IT systems, not commercial. Just federal systems, $7 billion. And we have EU Commission recommendation for PQC migration, which is February this year. And even in Singapore, where I come from, the Monetary Authority of Singapore, which is equivalent to RBI, released an advisory to all the financial institutions to start looking at PQC migration. So a lot of government agencies are actually. Okay. I'm not aware of it. Okay, got it. I'll probably look it up. Yeah. So a lot of activities are actually happening around the world as well, yeah, that's a good thing. And also, not just the standardization of the algorithms, the protocols also have to be tweaked a little bit in order to accommodate these new PQC algorithms. Because the main issue is PQC algorithms, key sizes are larger, ciphertexts are larger, and signatures are also larger. So, and turns out that there are some limitations in existing protocols where they are not able to actually accommodate these new PQC algorithms just like that. So it needs a small tweak in protocols, and there are new RFCs for protocols as well in order to how to make them quantum safe and how to integrate the new crypto algorithms with larger key sizes and larger ciphertext sizes as well. So you can look up to a lot of RFCs that have talked about how to migrate protocols to quantum safe as well. So yeah, I think this is another very important document, I would say, which is from NIST, which is actually November 2024, very timely for this event. So this is about transitioning to post-quantum crypto standards, and it basically defines very clear timelines when they're actually deprecating the old algorithms and when they want to actually transition to the new ones. And they have actually established 2035 as a prime target for PQC migration for federal systems. And they broadly want to deprecate the existing algorithms by 2030, and they want to completely remove support for classical algorithms by 2035. So this is roughly the one-liner from this report. And these are some tables where You see finite field Diffie-Hellman deprecated after 2030, disallowed after 2035. Elliptic curve, RSA deprecated, disallowed, same timelines. Similarly, for digital signatures, you have similar timelines: 2030 deprecation and 2035 disallowed. By deprecation, what I actually mean is you can use them, but then the risk completely is on the person using it. So no one will basically take the blame. Whoever is using it is supposed to be blamed. And disallowed means it has to be completely removed. Support has to be removed. So this is actually a very nice motivation for a lot of companies to start acting. And companies which are working in the PQC space, they can go tell customers, show these two tables and say, what are you doing? What are you doing? Right? So I think this is a good push. And similarly, US also released a separate transitioning to PQC report for national security systems. National security systems are nothing but systems dealing with classified information, government contractors, and critical infrastructure providers. And they are actually having a very specific list of algorithms that they want to support. If you recall, there are multiple security levels for Kyber, multiple security levels for dilithium, and a few other schemes. But as you can see, the CNSA 2.0 is an algorithm suite for national security systems, and they have very specific algorithms that they have chosen. And this is basically CNSA 1.0 in 2015, which supported ECDH, ECDSA, RSA, and so on. And this is CNSA 2.0, which was basically framed in 2022. And as you can see, if you look at Kyber, for instance, they only want to use level 5. Level 5 is basically the highest parameter set for Kyber. They don't want to support level 1, level 3, directly level 5. Similarly for dilithium, level 5. So basically they're using the most conservative parameter set for their national security systems. And this is also very concrete recommendation and very direct without being unclear, right? So there is also that. And this also the timeline chart. And they have come up with a timeline chart for different use cases. So for example, there is a use case for software firmware signing, web browsers, web servers, traditional network equipments, operating systems, and so on. And they have three types of timelines. So the first one is you add CNSA 2.0 as an option and you start testing it. And the bold one is you make the new algorithms as a default. So initially you start supporting it, and after a point you make it a default, and after some point you remove. You exclusively only use the new algorithms. You completely remove support for the old ones. So I think this is a very nice phased approach in order to actually migrate your systems, right? So this is also a very good pointer that could be taken into account. Similarly, you have recommendations from EU. This is a report that just came out last month as well. So this consensus from 18 member states in the EU, which is also a pretty big deal. All of these cybersecurity agencies and regulatory bodies from different countries in the EU, they have actually recommended deploying PQC in hybrid. So they don't want pure Kyber, they don't want pure dilithium, they want hybrid PQC solutions, because they probably do not want to yet completely have only pure post-quantum connections. They want to actually use hybrid. And that's actually one of the main takeaways. So what do I mean by hybrid? Hybrid is basically combining quantum resistant and quantum vulnerable algorithms. So for example, you combine ECDH and MLChem, you derive the session keys from both these algorithms, and then combine the session key and come up with a key. So that key is actually secure from the guarantees from ECDH, also from MLChem. So even if MLChem is, for whatever reason, if MLChem is found to be broken, then you can actually fall back on ECDH. Now, why this hybrid algorithm is being used is because I talked about some breaks of Psych and Rainbow, right? The algorithms that was probably would have been selected. So those algorithms did not have quantum attacks, they are classical attacks. You could break Rainbow on a laptop in a day. In fact, the paper that published that attack said breaking Rainbow on a laptop or something like that. So these are classical attacks. So it's not just that quantum algorithms or PQC algorithms might only succumb to quantum attacks. They might also succumb to very simple or even classical attacks as well. So that's the reason why even today it's important to actually combine classical with quantum. So that's actually That's what we refer to as PQC classical hybrid protocols. Right? Obviously, there are some challenges with hybrid protocols. It increases complexity because you have two keys, you have two signatures, you have two ciphertexts. Increases the complexity. But I think a lot of products have already adopted hybrid PQC, and it's actually quite performance-wise. The user at least does not observe so much of a problem, really. In fact, I can show you a demonstration of a hybrid thing. So what I'm doing is I'm basically going to pqcloudflareresearch.com. So this is actually a website that supports, this is from Cloudflare. It's actually a website that supports prototyping post-quantum cryptography. So you can basically just connect to this web server, and it will tell you whether you're actually using a post-quantum secure browser. So if you want to test whether your browser is PQC safe, you can just connect to this website, and this will tell you whether your browser is post-quantum secure. And yeah, so I think now it's clear. So here you can see that it's telling that you're using X25519 MLChem768. So this is my Chrome browser, and it uses a combination of X25519, which is based on elliptical cryptography, and MLChem768, which is the NIST PQC standard. So my Chrome browser is already supporting, at least the key exchange is quantum safe, but the signature is not. Signature is still based on classical RSA, right? And now if I go to my Brave browser, yeah, so this one is actually using X25519 with Kyber 768, which is actually not the NIST standard. This is the Kyber 768 algorithm that competed in the competition. So this is not yet up to date, but the Chrome browser is up to date. So you will see different products using different sort of algorithms. And there's one more very interesting website which is called pqscan.io. Right? So what you can basically do is you can check whether a particular web server supports post-quantum cryptography. So let's say I'm just doing ndtv.com. So here it says that the web server that's hosting that website is still not using, the chem is still based on elliptical cryptography. Similarly, you can, let's say, test for google.com. And yeah, here you can see Google's web servers are actually using X255 and Kyber 768.00. But what's funny is, so this is that. And you can basically enter any website and you can check what's the algorithm they're supporting. Now the reason why I'm showing this is because just to show that a lot of companies have already started adopting PQC algorithms. I think there are also standards by country as well. A lot of countries are actually following the NIST standard. I think the font size is too small, sorry about that. But as Dr. Kabalishwaran mentioned in his previous talk, there's ongoing standardization in South Korea, China. They're conducting their own PQC competitions. I think Russia is also doing the same. And
Ukraine also.
And Ukraine. Okay, got it. So again, interoperability and all of that will come into picture. That's going to be a complex thing. So this is just the advisory from the Monetary Authority of Singapore to start PQC migration earlier this year. And the first step that they mentioned is actually maintaining an inventory of cryptographic assets. So in order to actually carry out PQC migration, so if you go to a CISO of a bank, and if you ask him, okay, is your bank quantum secure? Now, how do you come up with an answer for that? So you need to essentially generate an inventory of cryptographic assets. You need to scan your network traffic, you need to scan your applications, you need to scan your certificate management systems, key management systems. It's actually a very big task. And you have come up with a comprehensive crypto inventory for your organization. And MAS has given out an advisory for all financial institutions to actually start maintaining an inventory of crypto assets. So this is also a very important aspect. I'll not be covering this in this talk, but this is something to actually think about. I think I've talked about this, and yeah, I hope that in the future we'll have strong PQC that can actually resist quantum computer attacks. Hopefully, this can happen, and I think there is good confidence that this will happen. Right. So now I'm actually coming to the main portion of my talk. I don't know if I have enough time to cover that part, but I thought that touching about mandates, regulations, what's happening elsewhere, what's the general feeling, I think was important. So I kind of spent more time on that. But let me come to the main portion of my talk. So something to think about is we have really good PQC algorithms, quite good in performance, already being adopted. But if I implement PQC algorithms just based on the algorithm specification, is it sufficient? That's the question. Is my problem solved? Right? And turns out that the PQC algorithm might have theoretical security guarantees, like on paper it can resist quantum attacks, even classical attacks. But when you implement them on existing platforms, like if you implement your algorithm on an Intel processor or an x86 64, or maybe an ARM processor or embedded devices, things can actually go wrong. They can actually go very, very wrong if you don't implement PQC in the right manner. So even if your algorithm on paper is secure, you need to implement it in a very careful manner, because your implementations can go wrong, and if they go wrong, then no matter if you implement the most secure cryptographic algorithm on paper, it will still be vulnerable, and you don't even need a quantum computer to break it. You can, like with just $10 or $100 equipments, you can actually break your cryptographic algorithms. And that's exactly the reason why there are a lot of certification programs. So for example, you have FIPS 143 certification from the US, where if you are building a cryptographic module which has cryptographic functions, then you need to actually validate it or get it tested by certification laboratories. And only when your cryptographic module is FIPS 143 compliant, then you can actually start using it in, let's say, heavily regulated industries like the banking, fintech, BFSI, or any other heavily regulated industries. So essentially what those testing labs actually do is they take the implementation of the PQC algorithm. They not just test whether the PQC algorithm is compliant with the algorithm on paper, but they'll also test whether the implementation itself is secure. And that's exactly the focus of my talk as well. Implementation attacks, right? So on paper, your algorithm might be secure, but when you implement it, things can go wrong. And that's what is referred to as implementation attacks or physical attacks. And in this talk, I'll be focusing on physical attacks on Kyber. Kyber is the most famous PQC algorithm, and there were multiple works that actually took Kyber, implemented them on systems, and tried to test if I can break it through any other way. Theoretically, I cannot break it because it's quite secure, but practically, can I do something to the system that's running the Kyber algorithm, and whether can I break it? Very recently, we were able to break the NIST PQC standard Kyber when implemented on practically all processors. So it was actually a vulnerability in PQC implementations maintained by Google, AWS, Cloudflare, Signal, and so on. And the main problem is that the execution time of Kyber depended upon the secret key. So the implementation was done in such a way that the execution time of the cryptographic algorithm depended on the secret key. So someone who has access to, who can basically monitor the execution time of the crypto algorithm, whether it's taking more time or less time for certain inputs, they can learn some incremental information about the secret key. And by querying the Kyber algorithm so many times, they can basically break it. And this is actually called a timing side channel vulnerability. So I'm using side channels, but the information that I'm gathering is a timing side channel. So I'm using the timing, execution time of the crypto algorithm, and I'm basically trying to identify attacks. So this vulnerability is called Kyber slash, because slash, the reason for slash is because there are some division operations in Kyber, and turns out that if you implement division on our existing platforms, it will actually execute in non-constant time. Meaning, if you are dividing A by B, it will execute in certain time. If you divide A dash by B dash, it will execute in some other time. And this actually gives some information for the attacker. And by querying your Kyber algorithm with different types of inputs, you can actually break this, you can recover the entire secret key in a few thousand queries. So this was also published in several tech websites, and subsequently.
So here you are assuming like you can able to query this encryption oracle and then you will be able to find.
Yeah, it's a decapsulation oracle.
Oh, okay.
So I'm querying the decapsulation procedure with chosen ciphertexts.
Okay.
So it's a chosen ciphertext attack. You might be aware of Blankenbacher attack against RSA. Blankenbacher attack is an attack on RSA systems, was published in 1997, where they could basically query RSA decryption oracle, RSA decryption procedure and realize a decryption oracle. Similarly, here we were able to query Kyber's decapsulation procedure and observe the execution time, and if we are able to do some correlation on the execution times, then you can recover the entire secret key of Kyber. So here I'm just trying to motivate the importance of physical attacks as well, and even when NIST was actually doing the standardization process, they were looking at multiple parameters. For example, what's the theoretical security, what's my performance on existing platforms, but apart from that, resistance against implementation attacks was also an important criterion. How easy it is to actually secure my PQC implementation with physical attacks. So that was also an important criterion for NIST to actually select Kyber, because on Kyber there were multiple works that actually proposed attacks. At the same time, they also proposed countermeasures for Kyber as well. And protecting Kyber against implementation attacks was quite understood at that point in time. So that was also an important criterion for NIST to say that, okay, we understand Kyber from all aspects, and I have good confidence in this, so let's go ahead and standardize it. And the bottom line is, resistance against implementation attacks was also considered to be a key criterion. Now let me try to motivate a bit about side channel attacks and fault attacks. So you might wonder, we are talking about resistance against quantum attacks, but how am I able to do these attacks? Is there any problem with the proof, the security proofs? And turns out that yes, there are big problems in theoretical security proofs. I'll touch a bit upon that. So typical security proofs assume that your crypto system is a non-tamperable black box, that you cannot tamper. It's a system that you cannot affect it at all. It will always work correctly. But is that true with our existing devices? Our existing devices can perform bad computing.
At least with respect to encryption, like there is this decryption error is there, right? So that, maybe with respect to some conditions, like maybe we can.
No, here what I'm talking about is, let's say you have a processor or a computing platform. When, let's say you're doing a computation. Can you affect that computation? Let's say I'm adding 2 plus 3 equal to 5. It's running, let's say, on your mobile phone. Now, can I do something to your mobile phone to actually corrupt the computation? Or can I? Yes. So, exactly. The problem is that you assume that your device cannot be tampered and that your device is actually a black box. What do I mean by black box? Is I really don't know what's happening inside. But that's not really true, because your electronic devices are not black boxes. They emit all sorts of information, physical leakages, and that is basically the whole point of side channel attacks or physical attacks. Because your algorithm, you're going to implement on electronic devices which leave out a lot of physical signatures. For example, you are able to observe the execution time, which is a timing information. You are able to also observe the power consumption of the device as well. So especially for smart cards, for embedded IoT devices, you can observe power consumption of the device. When it's computing the algorithm, can I observe the power consumption pattern of it? Because your device is basically computing on different types of data, and when it's computing on different types of data, it's not consuming the same amount of current. It actually consumes different amount of current, and you can actually observe that, see patterns in that, and correlate it with the secret that's being manipulated. Similarly, you have electromagnetic emanation as well. So you simply place an antenna on top of a chip. The chip actually emanates a lot of electromagnetic radiation. You can capture that, you can correlate it with the crypto algorithm, you can perform some attacks. So this is what is called as side channel attacks. So the idea is that, and there's one more assumption that your crypto systems only give you information about the input and the output. The attacker only has access to either the input to the crypto system or the output, which is essentially like a black box. But what is side channel attack trying to do is it's trying to learn about the intermediate operations or the intermediate variables that is being manipulated. And if you have even a teeny bit of information about intermediate variables, then your security proofs no longer hold. They are basically gone to dust. So essentially, side channel attack is trying to learn information about the intermediate steps, and by learning enough information, you can actually recover your secret key.
So which means you will be assuming both the input and output are known to the side channel. I mean, whoever is running this.
Yes, so I'm assuming knowledge of the output or the input. At the same time, I'm also assuming additional knowledge about the intermediate variables. So that's why I think even from a research perspective, coming up with a security proof against side channel attacks is actually quite challenging, and it should also, I would say, maybe not now, but in a few years time, it will be good if there can be theoretical proofs included in the specification of the algorithms themselves actually, but that's not the case right now.
There are some protocols. Unfortunately, they haven't shortlisted in the additional row.
Yes.
Raccoon is one such.
Exactly. There was actually one signature scheme called Raccoon in the 4th round of the PQC process for signatures, which gave some security proofs against side channel attacks and so on, but that was not selected because it was lattice based. Lattice based, so that's the reason, probably the reason why they didn't select it. And similarly, the other main problem is fault attacks. Fault attacks is that can you corrupt the computation of your device? So let's say if your device is coming 2 plus 3, can I do something to the device so that it's not outputting 5, it gives output as something else? Can I do that? Turns out that yes, you can basically inject glitches in the voltage line, you can inject glitches in the clock, you can inject laser pulses.
The previous topic is the side channel attack. What is the mitigation for it actually?
You need to basically implement, so there is actually a technique called masking. The idea of masking is you split your secret into multiple parts and you operate on the individual shares of the secret. So let's say you have secret for Kyber, which is a polynomial or a vector of polynomials. You split your secret into multiple shares and you compute on each share separately. That's called masking. It's like secret sharing.
I mean, this is where the implicit the head signature will come into play. So you take the secret and then distribute among. I mean, you imagine that like maybe n number of parties, and then you think that okay, n number of parties are coming together to create the signatures. Where secret key is not lying in one person. Imaginary, like you just think that like maybe.
Exactly.
But the operations we have to be very careful. Like where you have to talk about something called marked operations, right? So
Yeah.
where like which is kind of side channel friendly operations which will resistant against this kind of attacks.
So essentially it turns out that if you split your secret into multiple parts and if you ensure that those parts are not mixing with each other and if you are processing on them separately, side channel attacks become more harder. You cannot have absolute security against side channel attacks. They are always possible. But as a security practitioner, you have to just make it harder for the attacker. So you basically have to, by implementing masking, by splitting your secret for Kyber into multiple shares and operating on the individual shares separately, side channel attacks become harder. Not impossible, but they become harder. So masking is one very, is a well-known strategy that can resist side channel attacks. And if you want to protect against fault attacks, okay, I'll talk about fault attacks first. So fault attacks, the idea is you can inject faults or errors in a computation. How can you do that? You can inject a laser pulse onto a chip, or you can inject a high voltage electromagnetic pulse onto a chip. Because these chips are only operable in a certain condition. They can only operate correctly in a certain condition. If you violate that condition in some way, the chips will start to go crazy and they'll perform all sorts of bad computations. And turns out that for cryptographic algorithms that's a problem, because in a security proofs you assume that the computation is always correct. You don't assume that, it's an implicit assumption. But turns out that for RSA for instance, if you have a single faulty RSA signature, your entire secret key can be recovered in one single faulty RSA signature. It's called the famous Belcore attack. It was published in 1997, if I'm not wrong, on RSA, and that's the first fault attack published on a cryptographic algorithm. So similarly, even in case of dilithium or Kyber or any crypto algorithm, if you can induce erroneous computations, it can lead to secret key recovery. I'm not saying that any errors will lead to attacks. If you can inject the right type of errors in the right operations, then it can lead to very easy attacks. That's basically the idea. And that's what's called as fault injection attacks. So the idea is the attacker observes the faulty computations and correlates it with some correct computations, performs some analysis, and can recover the secret key that was manipulated. For example, in case of dilithium, a single faulty dilithium signature output can actually recover the entire secret key. So you have to ensure that your dilithium signatures are always correct. If you allow the attacker to inject faults in certain operations, even if he observes one faulty signature, then dilithium is basically considered to be broken. It's not a problem with dilithium. A lot of cryptographic algorithms do have this problem, that if you inject a single fault at the right place, then your crypto instance is broken. Similarly, for AES, you have a fault attack that can, if you inject, I think, a single fault in the 8th round of AES, then you can basically break AES quite easily. You just need a single faulty output. So this is the idea of fault attacks. So given that we need to implement our crypto.
In that AES, you mean to say like 16 rounds is there, in that we may be able to clearly map like in what round it has to be injected, but how come here it can be?
Yes, so it depends on what platform you're looking at. For example, if you look at, okay, let me, yeah. So for example, if you have an embedded device, you can basically, I'll come to that point a bit later. I'll first try to motivate this. So this is actually a picture of a side channel setup where I'm placing an antenna on top of a chip, and I am basically observing the electromagnetic radiation pattern. And for example, this is actually the side channel information of, or side channel trace of AES. As you can see the individual operations happening and different patterns for each operations. At least visually you're able to see that different operations are happening. Similarly, you can actually do some sort of an inspection like this and kind of understand where you want to inject the fault. But obviously, if you want to target a particular operation, that becomes difficult because or finding when it's happening is difficult. But in dilithium, there is actually a fault attack that you can randomly inject a fault anywhere within the computation and dilithium breaks. So there are different types of fault attacks. There are some fault attacks that need to inject a specific fault on a specific operation, which is harder. But there are some attacks that say that you just inject a random fault in a random computation, you're good. It's enough. So there are different types of attacks. For example, some attacks need to inject a specific byte fault. You change this byte to 00 or this byte to FF or some value. But there are some attacks that say you just inject a random fault anywhere in the computation and it's good. Belcore attack is one such attack. So RSA, there's the fault attack on RSA, which is called the Belcore attack. You inject a fault anywhere in the computation, it's enough to break RSA. Even dilithium, there is actually an equivalent of a Belcore attack, which can actually break dilithium as well. In case of Kyber, you still need to inject some targeted faults. So different crypto algorithms are susceptible to fault attacks and side channel attacks in different ways. Yeah. And you might feel that, at least from the pictures, it might feel that side channel fault attacks are only relevant for embedded devices, but turns out no. There are fault attacks on Intel processors, there are fault attacks on ARM processors, not physically, I'm saying remotely. So even if you don't have physical access to the device, there can actually be remote side channel attacks and remote fault attacks that can be done. Because in a lot of modern processors, if I want to give you a particular example, there's actually an attack, there's a feature called DVFS, Dynamic Voltage Frequency Scaling. This is a feature that's available in ARM processors I think it's also available in Intel processors as well. So this is actually a feature where the idea is the chip is actually trying to dynamically change the voltage and frequency in order to optimize power consumption, because it wants to make the power consumption very low. But turns out that an attacker can actually change that register and can actually bring down the voltage for a momentary time, very short time, and so on. So even though you don't have physical access to the device, if you're able to actually control certain parameters in the device, you can inject faults without even being physically present near the device. And similarly, there is a famous attack called row hammer. Row hammer can actually inject bits in the DRAM of chips. You have DRAM, which every PC uses DRAM. So remotely, you can actually query the DRAM multiple times, and you can inject a specific fault in a particular section in the DRAM chip, in the memory. And if it falls in the memory region used by a crypto algorithm, then turns out that you can inject faults. So there have been multiple papers that have shown that not just on embedded devices, but on our general purpose processors as well, side channel attacks and fault attacks are relevant. And that's also the reason why when we identified the Kyber slash vulnerability on Kyber, even though they are running on Intel processors, AMD processors and so on, they quickly patched it actually. They quickly patched the vulnerability, because they could have just said that these attacks are not relevant for us, but still they made it a point to actually patch it. And whenever you're certifying your implementations, let's say common criteria or FIPS 143, they typically check for these things, because you don't want to leave any stone unturned, because it could lead to problems in the future. So yeah, that's.
So FIPS 140, they will list all these side channel attacks.
Yes. So FIPS 143, if you want to achieve like a higher score, then they do actually have dedicated labs that do side channel attacks and fault attacks. And there are specific testing mechanisms, and there are standards for testing mechanisms as well, where they basically try to say that, okay, I use this technique for 10 days with an expert level of 10 years or whatever, and he still was not able to break it. So I now certify this module as good enough. So that's the type of testing they basically do. And they basically try to achieve a certain score. So if you look at common criteria certification, they have different EAL levels. And yeah, so it's like that. And these attacks, yes.
Just like me. For FIPS 140/2, it was optional, but 140/3 or ISO 19790, it's a mandatory. You need to specify side channel attacks, what is the approach for that, countermeasures.
Yes. And particularly for smart cards, it is something very, very important. But yeah, even general purpose, I would say that at least some sort of testing would be done. How much time do I have? Oh, I think I'm already off. Okay, but I was not able to go into the specifics, but I do hope that kind of got a basic flavor. Oh yeah, I'll maybe wrap it up quickly. Okay. What I'll do is I will explain Kyber very briefly, and I will basically give you a flavor of what sort of attacks can be done on Kyber. So we'll start with yeah. Okay. Yeah. This is how chems are done. So whenever you are using a browser to connect to a server, you are using chems. Chems are used to exchange or establish a session key between two parties. Then you basically use this session key to, using AES, you use this key to encrypt and decrypt information between the two parties, right? So when it comes to Kyber, you have three procedures. You start with key generation, where you're generating a secret key and public key pair. You send the public key over to Bob. Bob uses the public key to encrypt a random message and generate a ciphertext and a session key. Now this ciphertext is then sent over to Alice. Alice uses this secret key to decapsulate the ciphertext and generate a session key, right? So this is broadly how Kyber is done, the basic idea is that even if the attacker tries to recover the public key or the ciphertext, he does not, or he will not be able to recover the secret key or the session key, even with access to a quantum computer. That's basically, in a nutshell, how Kyber typically works, right? So let me talk about how key generation works. So in key generation, you basically start with a random, you sample a random polynomial A. It's not a polynomial, it's actually a matrix of polynomials, and each coefficient is between 0 and 3328, right? And you sample, so this is actually a uniformly random polynomial, or uniformly random vector of polynomials, or matrix of polynomials, sorry. And then you have, you also sample a secret. So this secret is actually a small secret with coefficients between -2 and 2, which is sampled from a smaller range. It is actually a vector of polynomials. Each polynomial has 2 fixed coefficients. Similarly, you also sample an error, which is also in the same distribution as S, and you basically generate B, which is A times S plus E. So this is an LW instance, right? So your public key is A and B. So A and B form the public key, and your secret key is basically S. So now let me move to encapsulation. So encapsulation is basically that is generating the ciphertext. So in encapsulation, what you do is the main input is the public key. So you again generate a new LWE sample, let's say U, just A times S prime plus E prime, and you generate another sample, LWE sample or LW-like sample, which is B times S prime plus E double prime, right? And what you do is you need to encrypt a message during the encapsulation procedure, right? So what you do is you take a message. A message is typically a bit string consisting of ones and zeros. But then if you see, all the computations are done on polynomials. So what you do is you encode the message into a polynomial. How you do that is you basically take each bit and you multiply it by q by 2. Q by 2, q is the modulus. So if your bit is 1, then the corresponding coefficient is q by 2. If your bit is 0, then the corresponding coefficient is 0. So you map or you encode the message in a bit vector representation to a polynomial representation, and then you simply add the encoded message to the second LW instance, and you have an LW sample 2. So you have 2 LW samples, U and V, and this basically forms the ciphertext. And now you give the ciphertext back to the decryption procedure. Maybe I'll talk a bit about that. Yeah. So now let's look at decryption procedure. So decryption takes in the ciphertext U and V and the secret key S. So it's quite simple. So you simply multiply U times S, and then what you do is you subtract U times S from V, and you come up with M prime, which is actually an erroneous message polynomial. If you do the math, V minus U times S, you will see that it is an encrypted message, or rather the encoded message in the polynomial representation plus some small errors. So these errors are basically coming from the errors and the secrets that you actually used in the key generation and the encryption procedure. And then on top of this erroneous encoded message polynomial, you apply a decoding procedure to get back your message. So if you look at the coefficients of the erroneous message polynomial, they'll either lie close to 0 or they'll lie close to q by 2. So it's basically distributed in a Gaussian manner, either around 0 or q by 2, and you simply do a thresholding. So if your coefficient is in the upper range, then you say that the corresponding message bit is 0. If your coefficient is in the lower range, closer to q by 2, you say it is a 1. And this is how Kyber's encryption, key generation, encryption and decryption procedures work. I would like to just talk about one simple side channel attack that I think everyone can kind of relate to, which is actually the, yes. So, which is actually an attack on the encoding procedure. So, if you see the encoding procedure in Kyber, it simply maps every bit of the message to a corresponding coefficient in the polynomial, right? And if you look at it from a side channel context, what you're essentially doing is you're mapping either a bit either to q by 2 or you're mapping a bit to 0. And if you implement this encoding procedure in a very naive manner on an embedded device, then you can actually see the side channel pattern like this. And here you can actually see that if your message bit is 1, then it has a higher spike, and if the message bit is 0, then you have a lower spike. And by just looking at the side channel trace of a single computation, you can recover the message in one shot. This is equivalent to attacks that can be carried out on RSA and ECC as well. Even on implementations of RSA and ECC, if you do not implement it in the correct manner, you can actually perform such simple attacks, wherein just by doing visual inspection, you can actually recover the entire message in one shot. I think I'm just scratching the surface here, but due to lack of time, I'd like to stop at this point. But there are more complex side channel attacks that can be done, which include performing or doing statistical analysis on the obtained side channel measurements, and you can actually do a bunch of different side channel attacks. I will share my slides online, and you can also email me at any point in time. I'll be very happy to discuss it with you. So, thank you very much. I hope it was helpful.
I must thank Prasanna Ravi very well. We all must thank, in fact. So he has come all the way from Singapore to deliver this talk, and he will be flying back to Singapore again tomorrow. Okay. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
So call upon Dr. Kamlishwaram.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So we'll have a short break from the 4:54. We'll come back here by maybe 5:05.